The sound of shattering glass echoed through the dusty saloon as Zara Lockwood stumbled backward, her trembling hand pressed against her bruised cheek. It was 1878 in the small frontier town of Cottonwood Creek, Arizona Territory, and once again, she found herself the center of unwanted attention. "Worthless," spat Vernon Hollister, the saloon owner and her employer of 3 months. "Can't even carry a tray of whiskey without spilling it all over my paying customers." His meaty finger jabbed toward the drenched miner who was cursing and wiping amber liquid from his vest. Zara's eyes remained fixed on the wooden floorboards, scattered with broken glass that reflected the oil lamp's glow like cruel stars. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hollister. My hand, it seized up again. Your hand, your leg, your back, always something broken with you, ain't it?" Vernon's voice carried through the now silent saloon. "Maybe that stagecoach accident broke more than just your body. Maybe it broke whatever brains you had too." Laughter rippled through the room, and Zara felt her face burn with humiliation. The accident 2 years ago had left her with a twisted leg that never healed right and a hand that sometimes betrayed her with painful spasms. But it was the invisible wounds that cut deepest: the pitying glances, the whispers, the dismissal of her very worth as a human being. "Clean this mess up," Vernon ordered, tossing a rag at her feet, "and it's coming out of your wages, what little they're worth." As Zara knelt painfully to collect the shattered glass, she heard the saloon doors swing open. The usual raucous chatter dimmed to curious murmurs. "Afternoon," came a deep voice, smooth as aged whiskey but with a hard edge that commanded respect. Zara didn't look up, keeping her attention on the dangerous task of gathering glass shards with her trembling hands. She'd learned that new arrivals to Cottonwood Creek were rarely anything to celebrate, especially for women in her position. "What can I get you, stranger?" Vernon's tone had shifted entirely, now obsequious and eager. "Water for my horse outside, whiskey for me, and an explanation for why a lady is bleeding on your floor while every man in here just watches." The silence that followed was deafening. Zara froze, a piece of glass pinched between her fingers, and slowly raised her eyes. The stranger stood tall against the dusty light streaming through the windows. His dark hat was pulled low, but she could see the firm set of his jaw, the sun-weathered skin of a man who lived in the saddle. A silver star glinted on his leather vest. "Marshal Zachary Blackwood," he introduced himself, crossing the room with measured steps. He crouched down beside Zara, his movement fluid despite the jangling spurs on his worn boots. Up close, his eyes were the color of a summer storm gray with flecks of blue. "You're hurt, madam." Only then did Zara notice the blood dripping from her palm where a shard had sliced her skin. "It's nothing," she whispered, uncomfortable with his proximity and the attention it drew. "Nothing is exactly what these men were doing about it." The marshal's voice remained level, but his gaze, when it swept the room, made grown men shift in their seats. He offered Zara his handkerchief crisp white linen that seemed out of place in the grimy saloon. "I don't need charity," she said softly, though she took the cloth and wrapped it around her bleeding hand. "Respect isn't charity, madam." Marshal Blackwood stood and extended his hand to help her up. "And neither is basic decency." Vernon cleared his throat. "Now listen here, Marshal. Zara's my employee and she's broken goods," called out a miner from the back. "Everybody knows it. Can't walk right, can't work right. Can't do much of anything right," added another to scattered laughter. The marshal's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I believe I was speaking to the lady, not requesting a chorus of fools." He turned back to Zara, his hand still extended. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her uninjured hand in his and allowed him to help her stand. The simple act of being treated with dignity made her eyes sting with unshed tears. "Thank you," she murmured, quickly withdrawing her hand and gathering the rags and broken glass. "Leave that," Vernon ordered. "Go clean yourself up in the back. You're bleeding all over my floor." His smile for the marshal was strained. "First drinks on the house, lawman. We appreciate you keeping the peace in these parts." Zara slipped away, feeling the weight of the marshal's gaze on her back as she limped toward the storage room that doubled as her quarters, a cramped space with a narrow cot and a single small window. It was all she could afford after the accident left her unable to continue her work as a schoolteacher. She carefully unwrapped the marshal's handkerchief, wincing as it stuck to the drying blood. The cut wasn't deep, but it stung fiercely. Using water from the basin, she cleaned the wound as best she could. A soft knock on the door startled her. "Miss Lockwood, may I come in?" The marshal's voice was unexpected. Few people in town used her surname anymore. She'd become simply Zara, or worse, the crippled girl. "I'm decent," she replied, hastily smoothing her apron. The door opened, and Marshal Blackwood ducked his head to enter the low doorway. In the confined space, he seemed even taller, his shoulders nearly touching both walls. He carried a small tin box. "Town doctor gave me this salve," he explained, setting the box on her small table. "Good for cuts, stops infection." Zara stared at the tin, then at him. "Why would you do that?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Because you're hurt. People get hurt all the time in Cottonwood Creek. Especially people like me." The marshal removed his hat, revealing dark hair with a touch of silver at the temples. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into desert suns. "And what kind of people are those, Miss Lockwood?" "Broken ones," she said simply. "Worthless ones." Something hardened in his expression. "I've been riding the frontier for 15 years, madam. I've seen men broken by war, by drink, by loss. I've seen women overcome hardships that would crush most men, but I've never met anyone worthless." He opened the tin and gestured to her injured hand. When she hesitantly extended it, he applied the salve with gentle fingers that belied their strength. "How do you know my name?" she asked. A slight smile tugged at his lips. "It's my job to know things. I've been appointed the new territorial marshal for this region. Arrived yesterday." He wrapped a clean bandage around her palm. "I also know you used to teach at the schoolhouse before the accident." Zara's throat tightened. "That was a different life. Same life, different chapter." He secured the bandage with a neat knot. "There, should heal clean now. Thank you, Marshal." She withdrew her hand, uncomfortable with both his kindness and his proximity. Men like him, strong, whole, respected, belonged to a world she no longer inhabited. "Zachary," he corrected. "Or Zach, if you prefer." "I don't think Mr. Hollister would approve of me calling a customer by his first name." The marshal's eyes darkened. "How long have you worked for that man?" 3 months. Since the school board decided a teacher with a limp sets a poor example." The bitterness slipped out before she could stop it. "And before that, I took in mending. Worked at the general store until they said customers didn't like being served by." She gestured vaguely at her twisted leg. "Eventually, Mr. Hollister was the only one willing to hire me." "Willing to exploit you, you mean?" Zara's head snapped up. "I earn my keep." "I don't doubt it, but a woman of your education shouldn't be scrubbing floors in a saloon." She almost laughed. "Education doesn't matter much when you can't stand for long periods or write without your hand cramping." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "I need someone who can read and write to help organize the territorial records." Previous marshal left everything in disarray. Zara blinked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity. 4 hours a day, fair wages." He placed his hat back on his head. "Think about it." Before she could respond, Vernon's voice bellowed from the saloon. "Zara, get out here. Tables need clearing." Marshal Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Consider my offer, Miss Lockwood. I'll return tomorrow for your answer." He tipped his hat and ducked back through the doorway. Zara stood motionless, staring at the space he'd occupied, the tin of salve still open on her table. For the first time in 2 years, someone had looked at her and seen more than her limitations. She didn't know whether to hope or to fear. The next morning dawned with the harsh clarity unique to the Arizona desert. Zara woke before sunrise, as was her habit, and eased her aching body from the narrow cot. The previous night had been busy at the saloon, and Vernon had kept her working until the last drunk staggered home. Her twisted leg throbbed, punishing her for the long hours on her feet. The marshal's offer circled in her mind as she splashed water on her face and pinned up her chestnut hair. Working at the marshal's office would mean daytime hours, a chance to use her mind again, and most importantly, freedom from Vernon's constant belittlement. But it also meant change, and Zara had learned that change rarely favored those already at the bottom. She emerged from her small room into the empty saloon, grateful for the silence before Vernon arrived. Methodically, she swept the floors, wiped down the sticky tables, and arranged the chairs. The work was mindless but necessary, much like her existence had become. The front door creaked open, flooding the dim room with morning light. Zara turned, expecting Vernon with his usual scowl. Instead, Marshal Blackwood stood silhouetted against the bright doorway, his tall frame unmistakable. "Good morning, Miss Lockwood," he greeted, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Today he wore a clean white shirt under his leather vest, his badge polished to a shine. "Marshal," she acknowledged, leaning on her broom. "You're up early. Sun's up, I'm up, old army habit." He glanced around the empty saloon. "I was hoping to catch you before your employer arrived." Zara set aside her broom. "About your offer, hold that thought." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "First, I brought you something." Suspicion flickered across her face. "What is it? See for yourself." Hesitantly, she unwrapped the package to reveal a leather brace crafted with multiple straps and a metal support along one side. "It's for your leg," he explained. Army surgeon in Tucson designed these for soldiers with battlefield injuries. Helps distribute the weight, reduces pain with walking. Zara stared at the brace, running her fingers over the supple leather. "Why would you do this?" Figured it might help, whether you take the job or not. She looked up at him, searching his face for the mockery or pity she'd grown accustomed to seeing. She found neither, only a steady regard that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "I can't accept this," she said finally, though she couldn't bring herself to set it down. "It must have cost a small fortune. Consider it an investment in my potential assistant." A hint of a smile played around his mouth. "Unless you've decided to refuse the position." The saloon door banged open again, and Vernon Hollister stomped in, bringing with him the smell of cheap cigars and unwashed clothes. "What's this?" he demanded, eyeing the marshal with suspicion. "We don't open till noon." "Just having a word with Miss Lockwood," Marshal Blackwood replied evenly. "Official business," Vernon snorted. "What official business could you have with her, unless you're arresting her for stealing? Always suspected she was taking from the till." "I never," Zara began, indignant. "Actually," the marshal interrupted, "I'm here to offer Miss Lockwood a position at the territorial office. As my assistant." Vernon's face flushed an ugly red. "You can't just come in here and steal my help. I believe Miss Lockwood is free to accept or decline employment as she chooses." The marshal's tone remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "Unless she's indentured to you in some way I'm unaware of," Vernon sputtered, his jowls quivering with anger. "She owes me room and board, and I took her in when nobody else would have her." "Broken, useless, I'll take the job," Zara interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in months. She clutched the leg brace to her chest like armor. "I accept your offer, Marshal." The satisfaction in Zachary Blackwood's eyes was unmistakable, though his expression remained professionally neutral. "Excellent, you can start tomorrow, 8 o'clock. "Now wait just a damn minute," Vernon slammed his fist on the bar. "She can't just walk out on me." "Who's going to clean this place? Serve the customers?" "I'm sure in a town full of people seeking work you'll find someone," the marshal replied. "Miss Lockwood, do you need assistance gathering your belongings?" Zara glanced at her small room, which contained little more than a worn dress, a hairbrush, and a tattered Bible that had belonged to her mother. "I don't have much, but I'll need a place to stay. Mrs. Whittaker at the boarding house has a room available. Clean, respectable place for a lady." Vernon stepped closer, his bulk intimidating as he towered over Zara. "You walk out now. Don't ever think about coming back. Nobody else in this town will hire you once I spread the word about your ingratitude." For a moment, fear clutched at Zara's heart. Vernon was well connected among the businessmen of Cottonwood Creek. If he turned them against her, and the marshal's position didn't work out. As if sensing her hesitation, Marshal Blackwood moved subtly, positioning himself between her and Vernon. "Miss Lockwood's future employment is no longer your concern, Mr. Hollister. And should I hear you've been spreading falsehoods about her character, we'll have another conversation, one you'll enjoy considerably less." The veiled threat hung in the air. Vernon's face contorted with rage, but something in the marshal's steady gaze made him back down. "Fine," he spat. "Take the broken girl. You'll regret it soon enough when you see how useless she really is." Zara flinched at the words, but Marshal Blackwood didn't so much as blink. "I'll be the judge of that." He turned to her. "Get your things, Miss Lockwood. I'll wait." It took less than 5 minutes for Zara to pack her meager possessions into a small cloth bundle. When she emerged, the marshal was waiting by the door, Vernon glowering from behind the bar. "One moment," she said, and with deliberate care, she placed her saloon apron on the counter. "I believe this belongs to you, Mr. Hollister." Without waiting for a response, she followed Marshal Blackwood into the bright morning sunlight, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. As they walked down Cottonwood Creek's dusty Main Street, she was acutely aware of curious eyes watching from shop windows and porches. "People are staring," she murmured. "People always stare at what they don't understand," he replied, shortening his stride to match her halting gait. "Give them time. They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." They reached a neat 2-story building with a sign proclaiming Whitaker Boarding House in faded gold letters. The small front garden was well tended, with hollyhocks blooming along the white picket fence. "Wait here," the marshal said, ascending the steps to knock on the door. A plump, gray-haired woman appeared, her face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of him. They conversed briefly, the woman nodding several times before glancing toward Zara with kind eyes. Marshal Blackwood returned to Zara's side. "Mrs. Whitaker has a room on the ground floor, says it's yours for as long as you need it. First week's rent is covered. I can't let you pay, consider it an advance on your wages." His expression softened slightly. "You can't stay at the saloon, and you need time to get on your feet, figuratively speaking." Zara clutched her bundle tighter. "Why are you doing all this? You don't know me." For the first time, the marshal seemed at a loss for words. He removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair before meeting her gaze directly. 2 years ago, I was tracking a gang of bank robbers through the Superstition Mountains, got ambushed, took a bullet in the chest." He tapped a spot just below his left collarbone. "Local Apache found me, could have left me to die. Instead, they took me in, healed me, treated me like I had value when I couldn't even feed myself." He replaced his hat, squinting at the horizon. "Changed how I see things, changed what I believe about worth." His eyes returned to hers. "Everyone deserves a chance to be more than their worst day, Miss Lockwood." The simple sincerity in his words struck Zara speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Whitaker called from the porch. "Come along, dear, let's get you settled before this heat gets any worse." With a nod to the marshal, Zara made her way through the gate. At the bottom of the porch steps, she paused and turned back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there." Marshal Blackwood touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. 8 o'clock tomorrow, Miss Lockwood. Don't be late." As he walked away, his spurs jingling with each confident stride, Zara felt something unfamiliar unfurling in her chest, a fragile sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house proved to be everything the saloon wasn't: clean, quiet, and filled with the scent of baking bread rather than stale whiskey. Her room, though small, contained a real bed with a proper mattress, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window that looked out onto the garden. After 2 years of sleeping on a lumpy cot in Vernon's storage room, it felt like unimaginable luxury. That evening, Zara sat on the edge of her bed and carefully examined the leg brace the marshal had given her. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the leather oiled and supple. With trembling fingers, she removed her boot and rolled up her skirt to reveal her twisted leg, the legacy of a stagecoach accident that had crushed the bones and left them to heal improperly when the town doctor pronounced her case hopeless. The memory of that day still haunted her: the screams, the splintering wood, the horse's terrified whinnies as the coach tumbled down the ravine. She'd been traveling to visit her ailing aunt in Tucson when the driver took a curve too fast. 3 passengers died instantly. Zara survived, only to wish sometimes that she hadn't. Pushing the dark thoughts aside, she strapped the brace around her calf and thigh, adjusting the buckles until it fit snugly. The metal support aligned with her weakened leg, and when she cautiously stood, she found that it indeed distributed her weight more evenly. The constant ache diminished slightly, and her stance felt more secure. Taking a few experimental steps around the room, Zara marveled at the difference. Her limp was still pronounced, but the sharp pain that usually accompanied each step had dulled to a manageable discomfort. A soft knock at her door interrupted her practice. "Supper's ready, dear," called Mrs. Whittaker. "Nothing fancy, just chicken and dumplings." "Thank you, I'll be right there," Zara replied, quickly smoothing down her skirt. In the small dining room, she found 4 other boarders already seated, 2 elderly sisters who worked at the millinery shop, a young bank clerk with spectacles, and a gray-bearded man who Mrs. Whittaker introduced as the town's telegraph operator. All greeted her politely, with curious glances but none of the open derision she'd grown accustomed to at the saloon. "So you'll be working for our new marshal," said one of the sisters, Miss Abigail or Miss Adelaide. Zara couldn't remember which. "He seems a very serious sort, but handsome," added her sister with a twinkle in her rheumy eyes. "In that dangerous way." Zara felt her cheeks warm. "I wouldn't know about that. I'm simply grateful for the opportunity." "Don't mind them," the telegraph operator, Mr. Jenkins, said with a chuckle. "They've been trying to marry off every unmarried soul in Cottonwood Creek for 20 years. With limited success," admitted one sister, "but persistent hope," added the other. The conversation flowed easily after that, with none of the tension Zara had come to expect in social situations. For the first time in 2 years, she ate a meal without feeling like an unwelcome intruder. The simple pleasure of it brought a lump to her throat. Later, back in her room, Zara sat by the window watching the stars appear one by one in the deepening twilight. She thought about Marshal Blackwood, his unexpected kindness, the steady way he'd stood up to Vernon, the story of his own brush with death. There was something about him that didn't fit the mold of the typical lawman who passed through frontier towns adept, a thoughtfulness that seemed at odds with his dangerous profession. And dangerous it certainly was. The Arizona Territory in 1878 was still wild, with outlaws, angry native tribes, and the harsh land itself claiming lives daily. Marshals, in particular, had short life expectancies. The thought of Zachary Blackwood facing such dangers stirred an unexpected protectiveness in her. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself. "He's your employer, nothing more." Yet as she drifted off to sleep in her comfortable new bed, it was the marshal's storm-gray eyes that followed her into dreams. The territorial office occupied the ground floor of a solid brick building at the end of Main Street. When Zara arrived promptly at 8 the next morning, she found the door unlocked but no sign of Marshal Blackwood. The front room contained a desk, several wooden chairs, and wanted posters covering most of one wall. A heavy iron door presumably led to the cells in back. A second door opened to a smaller office, and here Zara discovered the source of the marshal's complaint about disarray. Every surface was buried under stacks of papers, ledgers, and correspondence. Dust covered everything and the air smelled musty, as if the windows hadn't been opened in months. "Good Lord," she murmured, setting down her shawl. "Previous marshal wasn't much for paperwork," came Zachary's voice from behind her. He stood in the doorway, a pot of coffee in one hand and 2 tin cups in the other. "Hope you don't scare easily. After serving whiskey to miners for 3 months, this is just paper." Zara accepted the cup he offered, noticing how he'd already added a splash of milk without asking. Somehow, he'd guessed her preference correctly. Smart way to look at it. He surveyed the chaos with a resigned expression. "I need to know what we've got here." Case files, wanted notices, land dispute records, arrest warrants, it's all jumbled together. Zara sipped her coffee, mentally organizing the task. "We'll need a system, categories first, then chronological within each category. I'll leave that to you. I trust your judgment." He moved a stack of papers from a chair, revealing a small wooden desk beneath. "This can be your workspace. It's not much, but it's perfect," Zara interrupted, running her hand over the scarred but solid surface. A real desk where she could use her mind instead of just her hands. It felt like reclaiming a piece of her former self. The marshal seemed pleased by her reaction. "I've got to ride out to the Sanchez Ranch boundary dispute. That's getting ugly. Probably won't be back until late afternoon. I'll get started organizing, she promised. By the time you return, I'll have made some headway. He nodded, then hesitated. The leg brace, is it helping? Very much, Zara said honestly. Thank you again. Don't mention it. He finished his coffee in one long swallow and set down the cup. There's a lunch basket from Mrs. Whitaker in the front office. And if anyone comes in with urgent business, Jenkins at the telegraph office can send word to me. After he left, Zara stood for a moment absorbing the quiet of the office. The building was solid, the walls thick enough to muffle the street sounds outside. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The space felt serious, purposeful, a far cry from the raucous saloon. Rolling up her sleeves, she got to work. She began by clearing the small desk, creating stacks on the floor sorted by type of document. Arrest records in one pile, wanted notices in another, correspondence with the territorial governor in a third. Slowly, order began to emerge from chaos. By midday, her back ached and her hand had developed a familiar cramp, but Zara felt more satisfaction than she had in years. This was work that mattered, work that used her mind. When she unwrapped Mrs. Whitaker's lunch basket to find fresh bread, sliced ham, and apple pie, she nearly wept with gratitude. The afternoon passed in the same focused rhythm. Occasionally, she heard footsteps in the front office, townspeople coming to speak with the marshal, finding him absent, and leaving again. No one ventured into the back office where she worked, which suited her fine. She wasn't ready for the inevitable questions and judgment. The sun was low in the sky when the front door opened again, followed by the distinctive jingle of spurs that announced the marshal's return. Zara straightened, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. Hours of sorting dusty papers had left smudges on her hands and probably her face as well. Marshal Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his tall frame blocking most of the light. He'd removed his hat, and his dark hair was damp with sweat, his shirt collar open at the throat. The day's ride had left a fine layer of dust on his clothes, and a day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "Miss Lockwood," he greeted, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the transformation of the office. Zara stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Marshal, how was the boundary dispute resolved? For now." He stepped further into the room, surveying the neat stacks of paper, each labeled with a small card. "This is impressive. I've only just begun," she said, unable to keep the pride from her voice, "but I've sorted everything by category. Tomorrow I'll start organizing each pile chronologically and creating indexes." He picked up one of the labeled cards, his lips quirking in a half smile. "Your handwriting puts mine to shame." "I was a teacher," she reminded him. "Legible handwriting was required, so it was." He set down the card and met her gaze directly. "Thank you. This is far more progress than I expected in one day." The simple, sincere gratitude in his voice warmed her more than it should have. "You're welcome. It's satisfying work, even with all this dust." He gestured to a smudge on her cheek, and Zara felt her face heat as she quickly wiped it away. "Especially with the dust," she replied. "It means I'm accomplishing something that needed doing." The marshal studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're not what I expected, Zara Lockwood." The use of her first name startled her. "What did you expect? Someone beaten down, resigned?" He shook his head slightly. "But there's a fire in you that all their talk of broken and worthless couldn't extinguish." Zara looked down, uncomfortable with both his perception and the admiration in his voice. "They nearly succeeded," she admitted softly. "Some days I believed them, but not today." She raised her eyes to his. "No, not today." Something passed between them in that quiet moment, a recognition, an understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. Zara was the first to look away, her heart beating oddly fast. "It's getting late," she said, reaching for her shawl. "I should return to the boarding house before dark." "I'll walk you," he offered immediately. "There's no need. It's just down the street and I insist." His tone brooked no argument. "Part of the job is making sure my assistant gets home safely." As they walked the short distance to Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house, Zara was acutely aware of the contrast they must present, the tall, imposing lawman and the limping woman beside him. Yet the marshal adjusted his stride to hers without comment, and his presence beside her felt protective rather than pitying. Several townspeople nodded greetings as they passed. Zara noticed their curious glances, the whispers that followed in their wake. Cottonwood Creek had never seen her as anything but the crippled girl, the broken teacher reduced to serving drinks in the saloon. Now she walked alongside the territory's most powerful lawman, employed in a position of respect. "People are talking," she murmured. "People always talk," he replied easily. "Especially in small towns where entertainment is limited. They'll say unkind things about why you hired me." The marshal stopped walking, turning to face her with unexpected intensity. "Let them talk. I know why I hired you, and so do you." "Do I?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes held her steadily. "Because you're intelligent, educated, and capable. Because those papers needed organizing, and you're the most qualified person in Cottonwood Creek to do it." The simple truth of his words silenced her objections. They resumed walking, and when they reached the boarding house gate, Zara turned to him with newfound resolve. 8 o'clock tomorrow." Marshal Blackwood nodded, the hint of a smile softening his features. 8 o'clock. Sleep well, Miss Lockwood." As she watched him walk away, his straight back and purposeful stride a stark contrast to her own halting gait, Zara felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. For the first time in 2 years, someone had looked at her and seen capability instead of limitation, strength instead of weakness. It was, she realized with a start, a dangerous feeling. Hope was a luxury she'd learned to live without. Allowing it back into her heart meant risking the pain of its loss all over again. Yet as she climbed the steps to the boarding house, Zara couldn't quite suppress the small smile that curved her lips. One day of meaningful work, of being treated with respect, had awakened something she'd thought long dead. And dangerous or not, she wasn't ready to surrender it just yet. Over the next 2 weeks, Zara and Marshal Blackwood settled into a comfortable routine. She arrived each morning to find coffee waiting, sometimes accompanied by fresh biscuits or muffins from the bakery. They would discuss the day's priorities before the marshal rode out on his rounds, leaving Zara to continue her meticulous organization of the office. The work was satisfying beyond measure. Each day, she uncovered new information about the territory land grant disputes, cattle rustling operations, stagecoach robbery patterns. She created maps tracking criminal activity, compiled lists of known outlaws, and developed a filing system that allowed the marshal to find any document within minutes. For his part, Zachary Blackwood seemed genuinely impressed by her efficiency. His initial respect deepened into something that felt like admiration, and occasionally Zara would look up from her work to find his storm-gray eyes watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. It was foolish, she told herself repeatedly. He was her employer, a man whose job required him to face danger daily. A man who could have any woman in the territory, and she was still Zara Lockwood, broken in body if not in spirit. Any tender feelings she might harbor could only lead to disappointment. Still, she couldn't help noticing things about him, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when he was amused, but trying not to show it. How he always positioned himself so she wouldn't have to turn her neck to see him when they spoke. The gentleness in his calloused hands when he occasionally helped her with heavy ledgers. On this particular morning, Zara arrived to find the office empty. No coffee brewing, no marshal's hat on the peg by the door. Unusual, but not alarming, he sometimes rode out early if urgent business required his attention. She set to work on the land dispute files, which had proven particularly complex. The previous marshal had kept minimal records, often scribbling notes on scraps of paper rather than completing proper documentation. Organizing these fragments into coherent cases was like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Midway through the morning, the office door burst open with such force that it banged against the wall. Zara jumped, her heart leaping into her throat as 3 men entered, dusty, trail-worn, and radiating menace. The leader, a wiry man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, scanned the room before his gaze settled on Zara. "Where's Blackwood?" he demanded. She rose shakily to her feet, one hand braced on her desk for support. Marshal Blackwood is not here at present. Can I take a message? The man sneered, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Ain't that sweet? The marshal's got himself a secretary. He stepped closer, and Zara caught the sour smell of unwashed clothes and whiskey. What's your name, sweetheart? Miss Lockwood, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. And you are? The man exchanged amused glances with his companions. Well, ain't she proper? I'm Jed Riker. These are my brothers, Tom and Frank. The name struck Zara like a physical blow. Jed Riker was one of the most wanted men in the territory, a stage robber, cattle rustler, and suspected murderer. Just yesterday, she'd filed a fresh wanted poster with his likeness. Mr. Riker, she acknowledged, her mind racing. I can inform the marshal you came by when he returns. Jed's cold grin widened. Oh, we'll wait. Been looking forward to meeting the new lawman. He pulled out a chair and sat, propping his muddy boots on a nearby table. Tom watched the street. Frank, check out back. As his brothers moved to follow orders, Jed fixed Zara with a calculating stare. So how'd a crippled girl like you end up working for Blackwood? Must be mighty good at something. The insinuation was clear, and Zara felt her face flush with anger rather than embarrassment. I manage the territorial records. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to complete. She sat back down, determined not to show fear, though her hands trembled as she pretended to focus on the papers before her. From the corner of her eye, she watched Jed examining the wanted posters on the wall, pausing with a bark of laughter when he found his own. They didn't get my nose right, he commented. Makes me look like I got hit with a shovel. The artist had limited source material, Zara replied before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Jed laughed again. Got a mouth on you, don't you? I like that in a woman. He moved closer to her desk, peering at the documents she'd been organizing. What's all this? Land dispute records. She subtly shifted the papers to hide the section relating to the Riker brothers' suspected involvement in a fraudulent land claim. Boring stuff. He picked up a pencil from her desk, twirling it between his fingers. So where's Blackwood? Out chasing some poor soul who stole a chicken. I'm not privy to the marshal's schedule. The lie came easily. Zachary had ridden to a ranch 20 miles south to investigate cattle rustling and wasn't expected back until evening. Tom Riker reappeared in the doorway. Streets quiet, no sign of the marshal. Jed nodded, his gaze still fixed on Zara. You know, Miss Lockwood, I'm thinking maybe we should leave a message for your boss after all. The menace in his tone made her stomach clench. I'll be sure he receives it. Oh, I think this is the kind of message best delivered in person. Jed reached for her arm, his grip bruising as he pulled her to her feet. You're coming with us. Panic flooded Zara's veins. Release me this instant, or what? Jed mocked. You'll limp after me. Blackwood needs to learn what happens when the law pokes into Riker business. Taking his woman seems like a good start. I am not his woman, Zara protested, struggling against his grip. I'm his assistant. Jed's eyes narrowed. Don't matter. He'll come for you either way. That's the kind of man he is too honorable for his own good. With sickening clarity, Zara realized he was right. Marshal Blackwood would indeed come for her, likely walking straight into whatever trap the Rikers were setting. The thought of him being hurt or worse because of her made her blood run cold. My leg, she said suddenly. I need my cane if I'm to walk anywhere. It was a lie she hadn't used a cane since receiving the brace, but it bought her precious seconds as Jed loosened his grip, glancing around the office. Don't see no cane, in the corner, behind the filing cabinet. As he turned to look, Zara grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a brass paperweight shaped like an eagle, and brought it down on Jed Riker's head with all her strength. He staggered, more surprised than injured, and Zara took advantage of his momentary disorientation to lunge for the door. Her twisted leg betrayed her. She made it 3 steps before it buckled, sending her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her hip and shoulder as she landed hard on the wooden planks. Rough hands hauled her upright. That was stupid, Jed growled, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. Really stupid. Zara's defiance crumbled in the face of his cold fury. As the Riker brothers dragged her from the office, her last thought was of Zachary, not the marshal, but the man whose rare smile had begun to feel like sunrise after a long night. She prayed he would be smart enough not to come after her alone. Marshal Zachary Blackwood returned to Cottonwood Creek shortly before sunset, dust-covered and weary from a long day's ride. The cattle-rustling investigation had led him to a canyon where he discovered slaughtered steers with altered brands, clear evidence that someone was stealing livestock, butchering the animals, and selling the meat to mining camps. All he wanted now was to wash the trail dust from his throat, perhaps share his findings with Zara, and then get some much-needed rest. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd found himself increasingly looking forward to those quiet moments in the office with his assistant. Her sharp mind and quiet determination had earned his respect, and her subtle humor often lightened the burden of his responsibilities. If he sometimes found himself watching her longer than was proper or thinking of her in the quiet hours of the night, well, that was his business and no one else's. As he approached the territorial office, however, Zachary's instincts sharpened. The door stood ajar, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. He drew his revolver and approached cautiously, years of experience guiding his movements. The front office was empty, but signs of a struggle were immediately apparent: an overturned chair, papers scattered across the floor. Fear gripped his chest as he called out, "Miss Lockwood." Silence answered him. Zachary moved quickly through the rooms, confirming what he already knew: Zara was gone. On her desk, he found a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled in crude handwriting: "Blackwood, we got your woman. Come to Diablo Canyon alone at dawn if you want her back alive. No law, no army, just you." Riker cold rage replaced fear. The Riker brothers were notorious outlaws, responsible for at least 6 murders that Zachary knew of. And now they had Zara, his Zara. The possessive thought startled him, but he didn't have time to examine it. Moving with swift efficiency, he gathered what he would need: ammunition, water, provisions for 2. His mind raced through possibilities, weighing options, calculating risks. Diablo Canyon was 3 hours' hard ride from town, a natural fortress with high walls and limited access points. The perfect place for an ambush. Going alone would be suicide, but involving others might sign Zara's death warrant if the Rikers spotted reinforcements. As he prepared to leave, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Jenkins, the telegraph operator, stood on the threshold, his face grave. "Marshal, I saw the light. Got a message from Tucson you should see." Zachary took the paper, scanning it quickly. It was a warning that the Riker brothers had been spotted headed toward Cottonwood Creek, likely seeking revenge for the arrest of their cousin the previous month. "The warning's a bit late," Zachary said grimly, showing Jenkins the ransom note. "They've taken Miss Lockwood." The older man's face paled. "Good Lord, that poor girl suffered enough. I'm going after her." "Alone, that's madness, Marshal. The Rikers never fight fair." "I don't intend to fight fair either." Zachary checked his revolver one last time. "But I need your help, Jenkins. Send telegrams to the Army outpost at Fort Verde and to Marshal Davis in Prescott. Tell them Riker brothers are at Diablo Canyon and I've gone in after them." Jenkins nodded. "That's still at least 6 hours before help could arrive, assuming they ride immediately." "I know, but if things go wrong, I want someone to know where to find our bodies." The blunt assessment made Jenkins flinch, but Zachary had never been one to sugarcoat reality. "And one more thing, find out if Dr. Sullivan is still in town. Miss Lockwood may need medical attention when I bring her back." "When," Jenkins repeated, emphasizing the word, "not if." Zachary's expression hardened. "Failure isn't an option I'm considering." Within 30 minutes, he was riding out of town on his big buckskin gelding, following the moonlit trail toward Diablo Canyon. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Under different circumstances, it might have been a pleasant ride. Instead, Zachary's mind tortured him with images of what Zara might be enduring. The Rikers weren't known for gentle treatment of prisoners, particularly women. The thought of her afraid, possibly hurt, made his hands tighten on the reins until his knuckles whitened. When had she become so important to him? In just 2 weeks, she had somehow woven herself into the fabric of his life, her quiet strength and resilience awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. He admired her mind, respected her determination, and increasingly found himself drawn to her as a woman, not despite her injury, but seeing it as simply one part of the remarkable person she was. Now she was in danger because of him. Because the Rikers wanted revenge, and they'd identified his vulnerability with unerring accuracy. Zachary urged his horse faster, eating up the miles between him and Diablo Canyon. He would get her back. And then, if they both survived, perhaps it was time to acknowledge that his interest in Zara Lockwood went far beyond that of an employer for a capable assistant. But first, he had to deal with the Rikers. In the flickering light of a campfire, Zara sat with her back against a boulder, hands bound before her, watching Jed Riker sharpen his knife. The monotonous scrape of steel against whetstone had continued for nearly an hour, a deliberate attempt to unnerve her that was, unfortunately, working. They had brought her to a place they called Diablo Canyon, a narrow gorge with towering red rock walls that seemed to glow like embers in the sunset. The Rikers' camp was situated in a small clearing surrounded by boulders, with only one apparent way in or out, a perfect trap. Her captors had not physically harmed her beyond the rough handling during her abduction, but their leering glances and crude comments made their intentions clear enough. Only Jed's insistence that she remain unmarked for the marshal's arrival had protected her thus far. "He won't come alone," Zara said, breaking the tense silence. "Marshal Blackwood isn't a fool." Jed looked up from his knife, his eyes reflecting the firelight like a predator's. "Oh, he'll come alone. Men like him always do when a woman's involved. I'm just his assistant." "Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart." Jed tested the knife's edge with his thumb. "I saw how the wanted posters first got moved to the top of the pile, saw the maps tracking our movements. Blackwood's been hunting us hard and you've been helping him." Zara couldn't deny it. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd indeed helped Zachary piece together the Rikers' criminal activities, creating a comprehensive case file that documented their operations across the territory. "The law would have caught up with you eventually," she said. "It always does, maybe." Jed sheathed his knife and moved closer, crouching before her. "But we Rikers believe in setting our own terms. Better to choose the battlefield than be cornered like rats. And using me as bait is your idea of honor," he laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "Honors for fools and dead men. I'm interested in survival." His expression hardened. "Your marshal's been disrupting our business, making life difficult. Time to send a message that the Rikers aren't to be trifled with. By killing a federal marshal. The army will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Maybe," Jed rose, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Or maybe they'll decide one lawman ain't worth the trouble. Territory's big, sweetheart, plenty of places to disappear." Tom Riker approached from where he'd been keeping watch at the canyon entrance. "No sign of anyone yet. You sure he got the message, Jed?" "He got it." Jed kicked a stone into the fire, sending sparks flying. "Blackwood's the type to come rushing to a lady's rescue, especially this lady." The confidence in his tone made Zara's stomach clench. She'd seen enough of Zachary Blackwood to know that Jed was right the marshal would come for her, walking willingly into their trap out of a sense of duty and perhaps something more. The thought gave her both hope and despair. Hope that rescue might be possible, despair that it might cost Zachary his life. As the night deepened, the brothers took turns standing watch while the others slept. Zara remained awake, her mind working feverishly on escape plans that all seemed impossible given her bound hands and injured leg. Without help, she had little chance of overpowering 3 armed men or navigating the treacherous canyon in the dark. Her best hope was to somehow warn Zachary when he arrived, to give him some advantage against the ambush that awaited him. Dawn was still hours away when a whisper came from the darkness behind her. "Don't move. Don't make a sound." Zara froze, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would wake the sleeping Rikers. The voice had been barely audible, but she would recognize its deep timbre anywhere. Zachary. Slowly, keeping her movements minimal, she turned her head just enough to glimpse a shadow darker than the surrounding night. A man crouched among the boulders behind her. 3 men, she breathed, her voice a mere thread of sound. "All armed. They expect you at dawn. Front entrance only." A hand emerged from the darkness, pressing something cold and metal into her bound fingers. A knife. "Cut your bonds when I create a distraction," came the whispered instruction. Then stay down, stay hidden. Before she could respond, the shadow withdrew, melting back into the night so completely that Zara wondered if she had imagined the entire exchange. Only the solid weight of the knife in her hands convinced her otherwise. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Frank Riker snored softly by the dying fire, while Tom kept watch at the canyon entrance. Jed had disappeared earlier, presumably to scout the perimeter, a thought that sent fear coursing through Zara. Had he encountered Zachary, the answer came with sudden, explosive violence. A gunshot shattered the night, followed immediately by a second. Tom Riker cried out, clutching his shoulder as he stumbled back from his post. Frank leapt to his feet, rifle in hand, peering wildly into the darkness. "It's Blackwood," he shouted. "He's early." Taking advantage of the chaos, Zara worked the knife against her bindings, sawing through the rope with desperate haste. The blade was razor-sharp, and within moments her hands were free. She scrambled behind the boulder, pressing herself flat against the earth as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Through the confusion of shouting and gunshots, Zara tried to make sense of what was happening. Frank had taken cover behind a fallen log, firing blindly into the darkness. Tom was down, possibly dead, and Jed was nowhere to be seen. A flash of movement caught her eye, a figure darting between boulders on the opposite side of the clearing. Zachary, using the terrain to his advantage, drawing fire away from her position. The gunfire intensified, bullets chipping stone and ricocheting with deadly whines. Zara clutched the knife, her only weapon, and considered her options. She could remain hidden as Zachary had instructed, or she could try to help somehow. The decision was made for her when Frank's voice suddenly cut through the din. "I got her, Blackwood. Throw down your weapon or the girl dies right now." Zara's blood ran cold. Frank was bluffing. He had no idea where she was, but would Zachary know that? "She's right here." Frank continued, desperation edging his voice. "I swear to God, I'll put a bullet in her head." The gunfire ceased. In the sudden silence, Zara heard Zachary's voice, calm but taut with controlled fury. "If you've harmed her, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Throw out your gun." Frank demanded, "Do it now. Let me see her first. Prove she's alive." Frank's response was a stream of curses. He was cornered and knew it, his bluff called. In his desperation, he might start shooting wildly again, endangering both Zachary and Zara. Making her decision, Zara took a deep breath and called out, "I'm here, Marshal, behind the large boulder to the east of the fire. I'm unharmed." Her voice had the intended effect. Frank whirled toward the sound, giving Zachary the opening he needed. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession, and Frank Riker collapsed without a sound, his rifle clattering to the ground beside him. "Zara," Zachary's voice came from closer now. "Stay where you are. Jed's still out there." As if summoned by his name, a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind Zachary. Jed Riker, face twisted with hate, knife raised for a killing blow. "Behind you," Zara screamed. Zachary spun, but not quickly enough. Jed's knife slashed downward, catching the marshal across the arm. The 2 men grappled, falling to the ground in a desperate struggle. Zachary's gun went flying, landing several feet away. Jed was smaller but fueled by rage and desperation. He drove his knee into Zachary's wounded arm, eliciting a grunt of pain, then raised his knife for a second, fatal strike. Without conscious thought, Zara was moving, ignoring the pain that shot through her twisted leg with each step. She launched herself forward, driving her own knife, Zachary's knife, into Jed Riker's back with all her strength. Jed arched in shock and agony, the blade meant for Zachary's heart dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. He tried to turn to face this unexpected threat, but Zachary seized the moment, delivering a powerful blow to Jed's jaw that sent him sprawling. In seconds, it was over. Jed Riker lay unconscious, bleeding but alive. Zachary rose to his feet, breathing heavily, and turned to Zara. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, suddenly lightheaded with relief. "No, you came. Of course I came." His voice was rough with emotion. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Before she could answer, he closed the distance between them, pulling her into an embrace so fierce it stole her breath. Zara felt the rapid thunder of his heartbeat against her cheek, the tremor in the strong arms that held her as if she were something infinitely precious. "I thought I might be too late," he murmured into her hair. "When I saw the note, when I realized they had taken you." Zara pulled back just enough to look up at him, startled by the raw fear and relief warring in his expression. "I knew you would come. I just didn't want you to die because of me." Zachary's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch unexpectedly gentle for a man who had just fought for his life. "You're worth any risk, Zara Lockwood." In that moment, with dawn breaking over the canyon walls and the aftermath of violence all around them, something shifted between them, a boundary crossed, a truth acknowledged that could never be unacknowledged. Zachary lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Zara rose on tiptoe, closing the final distance between them as their lips met in a kiss that held both the desperate relief of survival and the tender promise of something more. When they finally parted, Zachary pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes still closed as if savoring the moment. "We should get out of here," he said reluctantly. "Reinforcements should be arriving soon, but I don't want to wait." Zara nodded, suddenly aware of the pain in her leg from her desperate lunge to save him. Zachary noticed her wince and immediately scooped her into his arms, ignoring his own wounded arm. "I can walk," she protested. "I know you can." His smile was gentle. "But right now, you don't have to." As he carried her toward the canyon entrance where his horse waited, the first rays of sunrise painted the red rock walls with gold. It seemed fitting somehow, a new day dawning after the longest night of their lives. And perhaps, Zara thought as she rested her head against Zachary's shoulder, the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. The return to Cottonwood Creek was slower than their desperate journey to Diablo Canyon had been. Zachary insisted on stopping frequently to rest, concerned about Zara's exhaustion and the strain on her injured leg. They rode double on his buckskin gelding, Zara seated before him in the saddle, his strong arms around her waist as he held the reins. Under different circumstances, the intimacy of their position might have embarrassed her. After what they had just endured together, however, such concerns seemed trivial. She leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "The army patrol should have reached the canyon by now," Zachary said as they paused by a small stream to rest and water the horse. "They'll take care of the Rikers, the ones still alive, anyway." Zara watched as he knelt by the water's edge, washing dried blood from a gash on his forearm where Jed's knife had caught him. "Will Tom and Frank survive?" she asked quietly. "Frank won't. The shot was clean through the heart." There was no regret in Zachary's voice, merely the factual assessment of a lawman who had done what was necessary. "Tom might, if infection doesn't set in, he'll hang either way. And Jed, he'll live to stand trial." Zachary's expression hardened. "The knife wound you gave him wasn't deep enough to hit anything vital. You saved my life, Zara." She shook her head, uncomfortable with his gratitude. "You saved mine first. That's my job." He finished cleaning his wound and rose to his feet. "What you did went far beyond duty." Zara looked away, unable to meet the intensity in his gaze. "We should continue. People will be worried." Zachary studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We're about an hour out from town. Think you can manage a bit longer, of course." She allowed him to help her back onto the horse, settling in front of him once more as they resumed their journey. As predicted, they reached Cottonwood Creek just before noon. Word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they rode down Main Street, a small crowd had gathered outside the marshal's office. Mrs. Whitaker rushed forward, her face a mask of concern, followed by Jenkins and several other townspeople who had come to know Zara during her brief time as the marshal's assistant. "Land's sakes, child, we've been worried sick," Mrs. Whitaker exclaimed as Zachary gently lifted Zara from the saddle. "When Jenkins told us those awful Riker brothers had taken you, I'm fine, Mrs. Whitaker," Zara assured her, touched by the genuine concern in the older woman's voice. "Thanks to Marshal Blackwood." Dr. Sullivan pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. "Inside, both of you. I need to examine those injuries properly." The next hour passed in a blur of medical attention. questions from concerned citizens, and the arrival of a telegram confirming that the Army patrol had reached Diablo Canyon and taken custody of the surviving Rikers. Through it all, Zachary remained at Zara's side, only stepping away when Dr. Sullivan insisted on examining her in private. "Remarkable," the doctor muttered as he checked her twisted leg. "I'd have expected far more damage after such exertion." "This brace," he tapped the leather and metal support, "it's distributed the strain remarkably well." "Where did you get it?" "Marshal Blackwood provided it," Zara replied, watching the doctor's eyebrows rise in surprise. "Did he now? Interesting, doctor." Sullivan completed his examination with a satisfied nod. "Rest that leg for a few days, and you'll be no worse off than before, a minor miracle, considering what you've been through." When the doctor left to tend to Zachary's knife wound, Mrs. Whitaker insisted on taking Zara back to the boarding house for a hot bath and proper rest. Exhaustion was beginning to claim her, the events of the past 24 hours catching up all at once. "You'll come by later?" she asked Zachary as she prepared to leave. The question felt bold, presumptuous even, but after what had passed between them in the canyon, she couldn't bear the thought of ending the day without seeing him again. His eyes softened. "As soon as I finish the necessary reports, there'll be an inquiry about the shooting." "A formality," Jenkins interjected. Self-defense, clear as day. Zachary nodded his thanks to the telegraph operator, but his gaze remained fixed on Zara. "Rest now, we'll talk later." The promise in his voice carried her through the next hours through the luxury of a hot bath that washed away the dust and fear of her captivity, through Mrs. Whitaker's fussing and feeding, through the parade of boarders and townspeople who stopped by to express their relief at her safe return. By sunset, Zara was sitting on the small porch of the boarding house, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind was too full for sleep. She watched the golden light fade from the distant mountains, replaying the events in the canyon, the desperation of the fight, the feeling of Zachary's lips on hers. "Penny for your thoughts." She started at the sound of his voice. Zachary stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand, freshly shaved and dressed in a clean shirt. The bandage on his arm was visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "They're worth at least a nickel," she replied, attempting lightness despite the sudden fluttering in her chest. His smile was warm as he climbed the steps to join her. "I'll pay whatever price you name." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Zara was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the sound of his breathing, the careful way he positioned himself to her right so she wouldn't need to turn her neck to see him. "Dr. Sullivan says you'll make a full recovery," she finally said. "From the knife wound, I mean, so I'm told." Zachary flexed his arm experimentally. "It was worth it, worth being stabbed, worth bringing you home safely." His voice deepened. "I would have paid a far higher price if necessary." Zara swallowed, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his gaze. "About what happened in the canyon, the kiss." He stated it plainly, without embarrassment or pretense. "Yes," she gathered her courage. "I don't expect, that is, I understand if it was just the emotion of the moment." Relief at being alive. Zachary was silent for so long that Zara's heart began to sink. Then his hand covered hers where it rested on the arm of her chair, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Do you truly believe that?" he asked quietly. "That it was merely relief, nothing more?" "I don't know what to believe," she admitted. "I'm not. Men don't usually, that is." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to articulate the fear that had haunted her since their kiss. "I'm broken, Zachary. My leg will never be right. Some days my hand shakes so badly I can barely write." "Why would you want? Stop." The single word, spoken with gentle authority, halted her self-deprecation. "Look at me, Zara." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. In the fading light, his expression was more serious than she had ever seen it. "From the moment I walked into that saloon and saw you kneeling on that floor, I knew you were extraordinary," he said, his voice low and intense. "Not despite your injury, but because of how you carried yourself in spite of it. Your intelligence, your resilience, your quiet dignity in the face of cruelty, these are the things I see when I look at you." He paused, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. The kiss wasn't just relief. It was something I've wanted to do since the first week you worked in my office. But I was your employer, and I respected you too much to complicate your life when you were just beginning to rebuild it. Zara's breath caught in her throat. And now? Now I've watched you fight for your life and for mine. I've seen your courage, your determination, your willingness to risk everything for someone else. His hand tightened around hers. And I know with absolute certainty that if you'll have me, I want to be more than your employer, Zara Lockwood. Joy, sudden and bright as sunrise, bloomed in her chest. What do you want to be, Marshal Blackwood? The corner of his mouth quirked up at her deliberate use of his title. To start with, the man who courts you properly. Who takes you to dinner at the hotel restaurant, who walks with you on Sunday afternoons, who earns the right to kiss you again not in the aftermath of violence but in moments of peace. And after that, she asked, scarcely daring to hope for the answer she longed to hear. Zachary shifted in his chair to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. After that, if you'll have me, I want to be the man who stands beside you for all the days to come. The man who sees your worth when others are blind to it. The man who calls you his wife and means it with every breath in his body. Tears welled in Zara's eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough. His smile was tender. I know you're the woman I want to wake up beside every morning, the woman whose mind challenges and delights me, the woman whose courage humbles me. He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. The rest, we can discover together. In that moment, all the voices that had called her broken and worthless were silenced by the truth in Zachary Blackwood's eyes. He saw her not the twisted leg or the occasional tremor in her hand, but her, all of her. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. To dinner at the hotel restaurant, to Sunday walks. She smiled through her tears. To discovering the rest together. Zachary's face lit with a joy that transformed his usually serious features. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and kissed her not with the desperate relief of their first embrace, but with tender promise, a pledge of days to come. When they parted, he kept his forehead pressed to hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. You should know, he murmured, that I've never been very good at taking things slowly. Zara laughed softly. Neither have I. Patience has never been my virtue. Then perhaps we shouldn't wait too long for those discoveries. He opened his eyes, and the love shining in them made her breath catch. I've lived enough of my life alone, Zara. I don't intend to waste any more time now that I've found you. As stars continued to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together on the porch of Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, hands entwined, hearts aligned, planning a future neither had dared to imagine just days before. And for the first time in 2 long years, Zara Lockwood felt not just whole, but cherished beyond measure. Spring arrived in Cottonwood Creek with a riot of wildflowers and the sweet scent of mesquite blossoms. 4 months had passed since the confrontation with the Riker brothers, and much had changed in that time. Jed Riker had been tried and sentenced to 20 years in Yuma Territorial Prison for kidnapping, attempted murder, and a host of other crimes. His testimony had helped authorities dismantle much of the Riker gang's operations throughout the territory, making the frontier safer for honest settlers. Zara continued her work at the marshal's office, transforming it from a chaotic repository of paper into a model of efficiency that drew praise from territorial officials. The governor himself had written a commendation after her organized records helped secure convictions in 3 major cases. More importantly, she and Zachary had courted openly and properly, much to the delight of Mrs. Whittaker and the elderly sisters, who claimed credit for predicting the match from the beginning. Sunday walks became a familiar sight in Cottonwood Creek, the tall marshal and the woman at his side, her limp less pronounced thanks to the custom brace and daily exercises Dr. Sullivan had prescribed. Whispers still followed them occasionally, those who couldn't understand what the handsome, respected lawman saw in the crippled schoolteacher, but such voices grew fewer and fainter as time passed. Zara found it easier to ignore them with Zachary's unwavering support, and the growing circle of friends who valued her for her mind and spirit, rather than judging her by her physical limitations. On this particular Sunday, Zachary had asked Zara to accompany him on a ride outside town. He arrived at the boarding house just after church services ended, driving a light buggy rather than riding his usual mount. "What's this?" Zara asked, surprised by the deviation from their usual walking routine. "Thought we might go a bit further today," he replied, helping her into the seat with the careful attentiveness she had come to cherish. "There's something I want to show you." They drove west out of town, following the river through cottonwood groves just coming into leaf. The day was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers carpeting the meadows in swathes of blue, yellow, and purple. After about 20 minutes, Zachary turned the buggy onto a smaller track that wound up a gentle slope. At the crest of the hill stood a solitary adobe house, its walls the color of honey in the spring sunlight. A wide porch wrapped around two sides, and a windmill creaked lazily beside a small barn. "Whose place is this?" Zara asked as they approached. "It's lovely." Zachary's expression was curiously intent as he drew the buggy to a halt. "It could be ours if you want it." Zara turned to him in surprise. "What do you mean? The Peterson family owned it, you remember. They moved back east last winter after Mrs. Peterson's mother fell ill." He helped her down from the buggy, keeping her hand in his as they stood facing the house. "I've been negotiating with them through letters. The deal was finalized yesterday. You bought a house." Zara's mind raced to catch up with his words. "But why would you?" "Because I love you, Zara Lockwood." The simple declaration, spoken with quiet certainty, made her heart skip. "Because I want to build a life with you. Because I can't imagine my future without you in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. When word came yesterday that the house was officially mine, I knew it was time." Zachary dropped to one knee before her, opening the box to reveal a ring of perfect blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the sunlight and scattered it like stars. "The house is yours whether you accept this ring or not," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "But I'm hoping you'll want both. That you'll want a life with me as my wife, my partner, my heart's companion for all the days we're granted." Tears blurred Zara's vision as she looked from the ring to the man kneeling before her, this strong, honorable man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it existed. "You know my limitations," she whispered. "My leg will never be normal." "There may be children. I know what the doctors have told you," Zachary interrupted gently. "That pregnancy might be difficult, that there are risks. I know also that there are children in this territory who need homes, who need love. Whatever our family looks like, Zara, I want to build it with you." He took her hand, his expression solemn. "I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be mine as I want to be yours, completely without reservation for all the years to come." Zara's free hand came up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. This man who had changed everything, who had looked at her broken pieces and seen only possibility. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain despite her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Blackwood." Joy transformed his face as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a covenant, a pledge of futures entwined beyond separation. When they finally parted, Zachary kept his arms around her waist, reluctant to let her go even for a moment. "Would you like to see inside your new home, future Mrs. Blackwood?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Our home," she corrected, smiling. "And yes, I would love to." Hand in hand, they walked up the path to the house that would soon witness the beginning of their shared life. The front door opened to a spacious main room with a large stone fireplace along one wall. Windows on three sides filled the space with light, offering views of the distant mountains and the river valley below. "It's perfect," Zara breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. "But it's so large for just the two of us." Zachary's smile held a hint of mischief. "I like to plan ahead. This house has 4 bedrooms, one for us, one that could be your study, and 2 that might, someday, belong to children. whether they come to us by birth or by other paths. The thought brought fresh tears to Zara's eyes. After the accident, doctors had warned that childbearing might be dangerous for her, perhaps impossible given her pelvic injuries. She had accepted it as yet another loss, another dream surrendered to the reality of her broken body. That Zachary had considered this, had already thought of alternatives that would still give them a family, touched her deeply. "I love you," she said, the words inadequate for the emotions swelling in her chest. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful beyond words." "You existed," he replied simply. "You survived. You refused to surrender your dignity or your worth, even when the world tried to convince you that you had none." He drew her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. "You're the bravest person I've ever known, Zara Lockwood. Loving you isn't something you need to deserve. It's as natural to me as breathing." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of what would soon be their home, Zara stood in the circle of Zachary's embrace and allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that some broken things could be remade into something even more beautiful than before. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small whitewashed church at the edge of Cottonwood Creek. Spring had given way to early summer, and the church was decorated with wildflowers gathered by Mrs. Whittaker and the elderly sisters, who had appointed themselves unofficial wedding planners. In the small back room that served as the bride's preparation area, Zara stood before a mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with delicate lace trim, specially made by the town's seamstress to accommodate the leg brace she still wore beneath. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a crown of braids intertwined with tiny white blossoms, and her cheeks were flushed with anticipation rather than fever or fear. "You look beautiful, dear," said Mrs. Whittaker, adjusting the fall of the dress one last time. "That marshal of yours won't know what hit him," Zara smiled, touching the sapphire ring that now resided on her left hand. "I still can't quite believe this is happening. Believe it." Mrs. Whittaker patted her shoulder affectionately. "You deserve every happiness, child, both of you do." A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Judge Holloway, who had agreed to escort Zara down the aisle in the absence of any family. The elderly jurist had become something of a father figure to her over the past months, impressed by her work organizing the territorial legal records. "It's time, my dear," he said, offering his arm. "Your groom is looking rather impatient out there." With a deep breath, Zara took the judge's arm and prepared to walk toward her future. As the church doors opened and the small gathering of friends rose to their feet, her eyes found Zachary immediately tall and impossibly handsome in his dark suit, his usually stern face transformed by a smile of such genuine joy that it brought tears to her eyes. Each step down the aisle was a victory, a testament to how far she had come from that broken girl on the saloon floor. Her gait was still uneven, her limp still noticeable, but it no longer defined her. She was Zara Lockwood, soon to be Zara Blackwood, and she was loved not despite her imperfections, but with them, through them, because of the strength they had forged in her. When she reached the altar, Judge Holloway placed her hand in Zachary's, and the warmth of his grip steadied her as nothing else could have. "You are breathtaking," Zachary whispered, his eyes never leaving hers. The ceremony itself was brief and traditional, their vows the ancient promises that had bound couples for generations. Yet when Zara spoke the words in sickness and in health, she felt their particular resonance. Zachary had already demonstrated, beyond any doubt, his commitment to loving her through physical challenges that might have deterred a lesser man. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary's kiss was gentle, but filled with promise, a pledge of all that awaited them beyond this day. The small congregation erupted in cheers and applause, led enthusiastically by Mrs. Whittaker and the elderly sisters, who were dabbing at their eyes with lace handkerchiefs. The celebration continued at the town's hotel, where the dining room had been decorated for the occasion. Music, dancing, and an abundance of food created an atmosphere of joyful festivity that lasted well into the evening. Zara danced only once a slow waltz with her new husband, who held her so securely that her uncertain balance was never an issue. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the celebration, boarding the same buggy that had taken them to their future home weeks earlier. Tonight, however, they were bound for a small cabin at a nearby hot springs, where they would spend 3 days before returning to Cottonwood Creek and their new life together. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace and wide windows that framed the starlit sky. Zachary carried Zara across the threshold despite her laughing protests, setting her down gently in the center of the main room. "Welcome to the first night of forever, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice husky with emotion and desire. Zara reached up to touch his face, still amazed that this man was now her husband. "I love the sound of that name." "As do I." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Are you tired from the day?" "We could rest, or—" "I'm not tired," she interrupted, her cheeks flushing at her own boldness. "Not at all." The heat in Zachary's eyes made her breath catch. Slowly, reverently, he began to remove the pins from her hair, letting the chestnut waves fall around her shoulders. His fingers traced the delicate curve of her neck, the line of her collarbone exposed by the scooped neckline of her wedding dress. "You have no idea how long I've dreamed of this moment," he murmured, "of being able to show you exactly how beautiful you are to me." Any nervousness Zara might have felt dissolved under the tender worship in his gaze. This was Zachary, her protector, her champion, the man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it existed. With him, she had nothing to fear, nothing to hide. "Show me," she whispered, reaching for the buttons of his shirt. Their first coming together as husband and wife was everything Zara could have hoped for: tender, passionate, and imbued with a depth of feeling that transcended physical pleasure. Zachary was gentle with her injured leg, yet never made her feel fragile or broken. In his arms, she discovered parts of herself long dormant, awakened now by the safety of absolute acceptance. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Zachary's heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. Outside, a full moon silvered the landscape, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. "Happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her bare shoulder. Zara smiled against his chest. "Beyond words." "Good." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you stay that way." 5 years later, on a warm autumn afternoon, Zachary Blackwood rode toward home with a lightness in his heart that still surprised him at times. The badge he had worn for so many years was now passed to a younger man. His role as territorial marshal exchanged for that of circuit judge, a position that allowed him to be home more often while still serving the cause of justice. As he crested the familiar hill that offered the first view of his property, he paused to take in the scene before him. The adobe house gleamed golden in the late afternoon sun, smoke curling from the chimney promising warmth and welcome. The small orchard they had planted in their first year was now beginning to bear fruit, and the vegetable garden beside the house showed signs of recent harvesting. But it was the figures in the front yard that drew his gaze and quickened his heart. Zara, seated on a blanket beneath the large cottonwood tree, reading aloud to their children. 4-year-old Thomas, named for the grandfather Zachary had barely known, lay on his stomach beside his mother, chin propped on his hands as he listened to the story. And nestled in Zara's lap was 2-year-old Eleanor, their miracle daughter, born against all medical predictions in a difficult but ultimately triumphant birth that had proven the doctor's dire warnings at least partially wrong. The children spotted him first, Thomas leaping to his feet with a shout of "Papa," and Eleanor echoing her brother with her favorite word, "Papa, Papa." Zachary dismounted, catching Thomas in mid-leap and swinging him high before setting him down to gather Eleanor in his arms. Over their heads, his eyes met Zara's, and the love he saw there still had the power to humble him completely. "Welcome home, Judge Blackwood," she said, rising to greet him with a kiss that, even after 5 years, still left him wanting more. "Mama has a surprise," Thomas announced, bouncing with excitement. "In the kitchen." "Is that so?" Zachary raised an eyebrow at his wife. "Another pie?" Zara's smile held a secret. "Not exactly, though though there is something in the oven. It took him a moment to catch her meaning, but when he did, his heart nearly stopped. Zara, are you saying? She nodded, her eyes bright with happy tears. Dr. Sullivan confirmed it yesterday. Spring will bring us another blessing, it seems. Joy, fierce and overwhelming, surged through Zachary as he pulled her into his embrace, mindful of the toddler still perched on his hip. But I thought after Alina they said it would be too risky. They said the same before Alina, Zara reminded him, and here she is, perfect in every way. She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. Dr. Sullivan believes this pregnancy will be easier. My body has grown stronger these past years. It was true. While Zara would always walk with a limp, the combination of the specialized brace, regular exercise, and the natural physical demands of motherhood had strengthened her considerably. She rarely used a cane now except on the most tiring days, and the tremor in her hand had all but disappeared. But it wasn't just her physical condition that had transformed. The woman who had once believed herself broken beyond repair now moved through life with quiet confidence, secure in her worth as a wife, mother, and valued member of the community. She still helped at the marshal's office one day a week, maintaining the record-keeping system she had created, and she had recently begun tutoring several children whose families lived too far from town to attend the schoolhouse regularly. Are you happy about this? Zachary asked, searching her face for any sign of fear or reservation. Zara's smile was radiant. Completely happy. Terrified, of course pregnancy is always a little frightening, but mostly just grateful for another chance to bring a child into this family we've built. Thomas tugged at his father's pant leg. Can I have a brother this time? Alina is too small to play cowboys. Zachary laughed, ruffling his son's dark hair so like his own. We'll have to wait and see what God sends us, partner. Brothers or sisters, they're all blessings. As the family made their way toward the house, Alina chattering from Zachary's arms and Thomas racing ahead to show his father the fort he had built that morning, Zara slipped her hand into her husband's. Do you ever think about that day? She asked softly. The day you walked into Vernon's saloon and found me on the floor, Zachary squeezed her hand. Sometimes. It reminds me how close I came to missing all of this, to riding right past that saloon, to never knowing you. They called me broken and worthless, Zara mused, watching as Thomas demonstrated how the stick fort could withstand an attack from imaginary outlaws. Even I believed it for a time. You were never either of those things. Zachary's voice held the same certainty it had on that first day. You were always extraordinary, Zara. Always worthy of love, of respect, of everything good in this life. I know that now. She leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment radiating from her in almost visible waves. Because you didn't just call me worthy, you showed me what it meant to be treasured. As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, the Blackwood family gathered around their table for the evening meal, Thomas chattering about his adventures, Alina methodically sorting her beans by color, Zachary and Zara exchanging glances filled with private meaning across the table. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet except for the crackling of the fire, Zachary held his wife close on the sofa they had placed before the hearth. His hand rested protectively over her stomach, where their third child grew, another miracle in a life that had become a tapestry of unexpected blessings. I love you, he murmured against her hair. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. Zara turned in his arms, her face luminous in the firelight. And I love you, for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. She touched his face, her eyes reflecting the flames and something deeper, something eternal. For calling me your future when all I could see was my broken past. In the warm glow of their home, surrounded by the life they had built together, Zachary Blackwood gazed at the woman he had once crossed a desert to rescue and knew with absolute certainty that she had, in turn, rescued him from loneliness, from the emptiness of duty without love, from a life half-lived. Others had called her broken and worthless. He had called her his future wife and meant it with every fiber of his being. And in that truth, both of them had found healing, purpose, and a love that would endure long after the wounds of the past had faded to distant memory.